we won several national championships together. I continued on with Brad, also a D3 coach, and we won several more. So that 8-year in a row streak. And I've got like these great snapshot memories of when we had the opportunity to watch our kids, break the tape and win those championships. And some of those championships I would say were sweeter than others, but all of them were sweet in their own way. And certainly, the athletes who we took from being, good athletes to national champions that we built over a series of years while we were there. Those are really sweet. The super talented kids who walked in and basically were destined to be national champions.
Hi, welcome to this week's episode of the D3 Multisport podcast. On today's episode, we have Coach Dave Sheanin. Dave's been coaching with D3 for over 10 years. Not only is Dave, one of my best friends, but just a good, honest guy. Recently, he won the USAT Community Impact Coach of the Year for all his hard work with not only Athletes In Tandem, where Dave essentially tows, pulls, and pushes an athlete for the duration of a triathlon, but also his work with the University of Colorado triathlon team, where he's been part of 8 national championships, which is just amazing. He's been doing this for 14 years now at CU. Dave is a very accomplished athlete himself, recently raced Indian Wells 70.3 at a sub 5 for an almost 55-year-old man, and 4:57. I think he was top 10 in his age group. Guy's just astonishing. I hope you enjoy this interview with Dave. He's a fantastic guy. I think you'll get a lot of inspiration out of it. And if you like the episode, please do share it with your friends, like it, follow us, and tell everybody about it. Thanks a lot. Hi, Coach Mike Ritchie here from D3 Multisport with longtime D3 coach Dave Sheanin. Dave, how the heck are you?
I am living the dream, Mike, as always.
As always. So what's new in your world in terms of training? You have anything coming up?
I am getting ready for my traditional December year-end closer in Indian Wells, 70.3.
Nice. You like that cold water, I guess, huh?
I like a cold water and a bike course that goes below sea level. It's a nice fast race, and Palm Springs is a good place to be in December rather than Colorado.
Totally. Well, yeah, the snow last week, I guess that's right. So when did you get started in triathlon? I know you swam a bit in high school, right? And then you did pretty good, like LA city or county type of meets and that kind of thing. Did you swim in college too, or back me up into high school and then bring me into college and
Sure.
how you started with triathlon?
Yeah, maybe I'll start just a quick line even before high school is that I did all the typical ball sports as a kid, and I pretty much sucked at every one of them, but kept going back. So, little league and football and all this kind of stuff. Baseball, I played right field every other inning. That kind of gives you a sense of what my skill was at the ball sports. And I always loved swimming, and just came to it very late, but was really blessed with amazing coaches. So I did my first year of competitive swimming was my sophomore year of high school. And, I don't remember exactly, but I don't know if I could have swum a 200 straight at that point. And, a 50 free was just sort of lots of effort and enthusiasm and not a lot of technique and skill to start that season. But the coaches I had were unbelievable, and they kind of set me on a path for the way I build my own coaching. By the end of that sophomore year, I was LA City champion in the junior varsity for 50 free, and then I swam varsity junior and senior years, always in the finals. Didn't win any other individual championships, but always made top 6 in whatever events that I was in, and I attribute that all to the coaching that I had in school.
Nice. That's awesome. And that's gave you a little taste of success there. And obviously you're a pretty competitive triathlete at this point. And what I admire about you is it seems like you're still, A, you got the desire, but B, you seem to still getting faster on the run and, figuring things out with aerodynamics. And, you could swim, 2,000 yards a week, and you probably do, and you're still coming out of the water and, at the top, the front of the pack. So that's,
I put my time in with the swim. So I do swim once a week. Most weeks, some weeks less, but typically once a week, just to kind of keep the volume up. And I'll correct you. I don't feel like I'm getting faster, and actually the times show that I'm not really. I'm getting slower, and that's a key to success when you get into the higher age groups.
That's right. So do you use anything at home to help your swimming?
I do occasionally jump. I've got a VASA ergometer in the home gym, and I jump on that periodically, more for just focused on some little corrections here and there with technique than really trying to keep up with the fitness. Although that tool will work for both.
Yeah, you know,
Uh,
it's interesting. The faster masters that I've talked to,
mhm.
almost all of them will say they work on drills or some part of the technique all the time. Even more importantly than, you know, swimming the 4K swim or, you know, the whatever 30 times 100 or whatever the set is. That they always tell me that it's about the technique, right? It's keep refining it because that's where you're going to keep that advantage over people.
Totally agree. Honestly, I can say that that probably 90% of the time when I'm swimming, I'm thinking about some element of my stroke. And the other 10%, I'm trying to keep the interval in my head so that I can I can make sure I touch and go at the right times. But
Right.
I really, every time my hand hits the water, I feel like that's an opportunity to get better.
Right.
Literally every stroke. So
You know, I had a,
um,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, I was gonna continue the story from earlier that when I got to college, I was, California swimming in the '80s was fast. I was not California D1 caliber,
Mhm.
and was a utility freestyler pretty much. Could have contributed on a team, but not
Mhm.
anywhere near the top, and
Right.
found triathlon pretty quick in the beginning of college, and that was another sport that I wasn't
Mhm.
great at to start with, but gave me some opportunity to grow.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was gonna just go back to your swimming.
Yep.
I had an epiphany a couple of years ago
Okay.
as my running was slowing down and my swimming was staying steady. And there were some faster guys coming into our age group since we share an age group. And I realized that these guys that are swimming, you know, 15, 16 minutes for an 800 or whatever, I was like, they're really not going to get faster because they would have to put a heck of a lot of time in. So it's worthwhile to me to stay in the pool or stay engaged in swimming because that's an advantage that I'm not going to lose as I get older, right? Like there's definitely that advantage to knowing, you know, how much time you need to put it in the water and the technique like you talked about, and just, you know, creates that gap that maybe people can't overcome, even in a sprint distance race. It's
Yeah,
just too much for them to make up.
totally agree. Obviously, the best way to go if you want to be a fast swimmer is to start when you're 3 or 4 years old and have elite level coaching all the way through.
Right.
Harder for the adult onset swimmers who we're competing against in all of these age groups, but you can tell the difference between someone who's come up through the sport and someone who is relatively new to the sport. And you're right, it's tough to catch up, but it's the same advice really, is to work on technique and don't worry so much about volume. And it's
Right.
we coached at CU for several years together, and we'd finish the workout, and the first thing that the kids would ask, this was before everyone had watches that counted this stuff, they would say, how many yards was that? And it's
Right.
like, well, who cares? What difference does it make
Right.
how many yards that was? Why is that the important metric?
Right. Right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
still get that with my master swimmers. How many yards do you think that was? And I'm like, well, I know what it was supposed to be, but you know, what did you get in?
Right.
Right. So, well, when did you do your first triathlon? That must have been late 80s, right?
Yeah, 1988
Okay.
at Benelli Park, California. So I think it's currently part of the LA Triathlon series. They do
Cool.
races there. I haven't raced there since the late 80s, but that was my first race. And yeah, there's a little story there if you want to if you want to
Yeah,
hear
let's
that
hear
as
it.
a listener. So
Yeah.
at that point, you were in the sport around that time too,
Yeah.
and there was no guidance. Nobody knew what the
Right.
heck we were doing, and there were certainly some DNA lottery winners who were dominating the sport. But for the rest of us, it was a lot of guesses. And there was one book on triathlon at the public library that I would check out,
Uh-huh.
keep it for 3 weeks, renew it for another 3 weeks, bring it back for a couple days, and then check it out again. And that kind of guided all my training, but I had
Hmm.
no idea, there's no coaching, and the sport was pretty new.
Right.
And I knew I was a good swimmer, and I used to ride the bike around town to get around, and kind of converted that into a little bit of training. And running was never natural to me, but I felt like enough, to get through this race. And it was
Mhm.
Olympic distance, and I don't remember exactly, but I'm sure I came out of the water, at or near the front. And then the whole race was downhill from there. Like, I basically trained as a swimmer, and people just kept riding past me and away from me on the bike, and I couldn't figure out why, because I'm young and fit, and
Yeah.
have been practicing for the sport. And I remember getting to the run. I have sort of two little videos in my head that still exist, 35 years later, is sort of me starting the run, which was, probably jogging for 15 steps and then stopping and starting to walk. And then I'm sure I walked the entirety of the rest of the 10K, except for the last 15 steps that I jogged through the finish line at that point. So, total disaster. In those days, the post-race food was just a picnic bench with some orange slices. And I remember sitting down at the bench and just starting to eat, and somebody saying to me, like, this is not a table to eat at. This is like to pick up your food and move on to somewhere else. But I was exhausted. I could literally go no further. And I'd raced with some friends, and they went to the post-race barbecue while probably somebody was, hand tabulating results to do awards.
Right.
And I said, I'll just pack the bikes up and meet you guys over there. And the next thing I knew, they were waking me up. I had a yard sale of equipment in the parking lot, and I was asleep in the back of my station wagon. So it was I had nothing but potential, I would say, for the sport.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, I was hooked.
So obviously you like hard things, and you picked up triathlon, which, without a lot of advice, you did pretty well, got going and everything. And now you're doing some AIT stuff, which is incredibly hard. And why don't you talk to that a little bit and how you got involved and what that's evolved to you? Because I know when I talk to you about it, I see this deep sense of appreciation for it. You're grateful that you get to do it. Whereas most people would look at it the other way, that someone should be grateful that you're towing them around, but you're actually happy to do it. And, I see you pulling the stroller through the sand and going up Old Stage, which is, has a 16% grade in there and all these things. And you've got this smile on your face. Maybe not going up Old Stage, but when it's over, you're smiling.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, so AIT, Athletes in Tandem, is a Colorado-based charitable organization started by my friend Dennis Vanderheiden out of Fort Collins. But we do work all around Colorado, races, and even out of state as well. I met Dennis in 2010. He had just at that time became aware of Dick and Rick Hoyt at that point. So he didn't know that story and had seen a video of it, and it just inspired him. It just completely spoke to him and said, I need to do something like this. Why is it just these two? Which it kind of was at that time. There's been some expansion of other organizations as well over the years. But I was getting ready to do the Horsetooth 10K swim, and they used to do, or I guess they probably still do, an athlete meeting the night before, and Dennis was friends with the race director, with Joe, and just came and spoke for a few minutes and just said, hey, I'm starting this organization. I don't really even know what it's going to look like. But he had started it with Zachary, an athlete who he felt like he could race with. And just kind of said, hey, if anybody is interested in helping out, he may have really been looking for donations more than actual, athlete help. But I went and talked to him afterwards and said, just keep me on the list. And so I think it was the next winter, or maybe it was later that year, we went to Naples, Florida for a HITS race. And that was my first experience with Athletes in Tandem. So that was an open water swim. My very first time swimming, pulling a raft. We didn't have an opportunity to meet beforehand. And then sprint race in Naples, very flat. Met a couple of athletes there locally. And my first partner was a young guy named John, who just was the greatest first partner you could have. He was not verbal with his disability, but he just laughed and clapped and rocked in the stroller the whole time. And I've got a picture of us coming to the finishing line with this. He's got this huge, like, he must have been mid-laugh, huge smile on his face. And I look at that photo almost every day. It's down in the gym, and it inspires me to know that you're able to share the experience with him. And I've since done probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 dozen races, some open water swims, some tries, a couple of runs. And probably half of them have been with my partner PJ here in Colorado. And he's who I'm typically going over Old Stage with at the peak, but I've had a couple different partners for that race as well.
Yeah. So just take me through, so you wear a harness for the swim, right? To pull a raft.
Yeah.
This is a 150-pound person, right? This isn't like,
I've had athletes as big as 150. PJ is under 100 pounds, but by the time you add the equipment, when you get on the bike, by the time you add the stroller, you're probably looking at, somewhere between 120, 150 for a
Yeah,
typical
it's a
athlete that
lot.
we're pulling. Yeah. Yeah. The power to weight ratio gets a little jacked up for me
Yeah,
because
it's, I
I
mean,
don't
it's
get the
rolling
extra power.
resistance once you get it up to speed, but going up a hill, it's all you. It's all power.
Yeah, gravity
Yeah,
pulls pretty hard on those things.
right.
So yeah, so in the water, it's pretty simple. It's just two like loop straps that go over each shoulder like an
Hmm.
X, and then we use a carabiner and hook a rope onto the back of the raft. The rafts are small, kind of flat, very stable stable
Hmm.
rafts. The athlete that we're guiding will wear a vest or whatever, a safety vest,
Yep.
but nobody, knock on wood, nobody with me has ever gone in the water.
Right.
But you would feel that if that were to
Yeah.
happen, the raft would get a lot lighter real quick. So,
Quickly. Yeah.
so yeah, PJ is great. He stays still in the water. He likes getting a little wet. He seems to appreciate it when he's wet by the time we get back in, but he doesn't want to get out. So that's been helpful. And I would say in the water, typically, if it's like normal, relatively speaking, reservoir conditions, flat, no wind,
Hmm.
it's probably only 20% penalty or so on the amount of effort that's required in order to hit speed. If it's windy, that changes the calculation a little bit.
Right.
And especially like going around buoys and stuff like that. I've been in windy conditions, sort of the good way, where you go to take a breath and PJ's next to me in the raft, and then other times the wind's blowing in our face, and that 20% penalty gets a little bit harder at that point.
Right. Right.
But it's
Right.
always pretty manageable. The swim really, I think, is the lowest sort of speed
Drag.
penalty for effort of the three
Yeah.
sports for sure. Yeah.
And then it's a burly for the bike, right?
It's a different brand, but it's basically just a very large trailer. It's big
Yeah.
enough, it'll fit an adult, and he's an adult at this point, not a large adult, but we've had larger adults in there as
Hmm.
well. And yeah, it's not one of these like aerodynamic lean back whatever. It's more like take your stuff to the market and around town kind of
Yeah.
trailer, but it's
Yeah.
got a high weight limit that we can use, and
Right.
it's locked onto the bike on the rear quick release, and then it's also tethered on just in case that were to fail. So yep, that trailer on the bike, on the flats, I would say it's probably something like a 1.5 times as hard, maybe a 50%
Right.
penalty, something like that. When you start going uphill, even small hills, where areas you think are flat,
Yeah.
when you put a trailer at 150 pounds behind you, it turns out that you noticed every, a 1% grade is still an uphill.
I'm sure.
And
Yeah.
it's at least I would say a double, 100% penalty, double
Right. Right.
the difficulty.
So
Yeah.
if it takes you 12 miles an hour to get up a 3, 4, 5%, then you're probably going 6 or 7, 5, 6,
Probably
7.
something in that range. Yeah,
Yeah.
we've seen the hardest race I've ever done with Athletes in Tandem. It's actually Boulder Peak is always challenging because of that
Right.
that hill. But the hardest race, you may remember that 106 West race
Yeah.
in Dillon, Colorado.
Dylan.
So that
Yeah.
yeah, we started it. The lake swim was at 9,000 feet, right? And
Right.
then the bike turnaround was in this little town of Montezuma at like 10,200
Yeah. I
feet.
was gonna say it was almost like a pass. I mean, it was pretty high up
It
there.
was pretty high up, and I went back in preparation thinking that this might come up on this, and went and looked to see what my minimum speed was during that course, and it was
Can I
actually.
guess?
Go ahead, yeah.
3 miles an hour.
It was a little under 2. It was 1.9. So, yeah, when you get onto those really steep sections, you've got to be able to balance the bike, right? Because if
Right.
you stop on an incline like that, I had to stop
Yeah.
once on Old Stage, and I was really worried I wasn't gonna be able to get started again without
Right.
rolling backwards. So there's a certain amount of fear that just takes over. That it's not a matter of like I want to stop and I could stop and take a rest. It's that I cannot stop once we're on the really steep stuff like that.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And then for the run, right, it's just a regular stroller, but it's obviously an adult size stroller, but
Yeah.
that's pretty hard. I mean, you're going from, pulling to pushing, which is a total change in muscle groups, right?
Yep, it
And
definitely
it's,
is. And again, the surfaces make a difference. So
yep.
pavement way easier than dirt. Not just the normal penalty for running, but just the way the thing rolls.
Right. Right.
And certainly like some areas, you'll be on areas of the course that have, say, some single track on them, and you can only get one of the three wheels
Right.
in the track, and the other two are kind of bushwhacking through. So that can be challenging. And again, it's the same thing. The hills, both uphill and downhill, are a little bit of a challenge on the run. Uphill
Mhm.
because you're pushing hard to to move you and the stroller rather, and the athlete up the hill. And downhill, it kind of wants to get away from you a little bit because,
Right.
it's on wheels. And so it has a handbrake, and I will oftentimes be on, running fast and on the handbrake just
At
to
the
kind
same
of
time.
make sure we stay together. Yeah. And same
Yeah.
thing, we're tethered together as well as just me holding on to the trailer,
Right.
or the stroller rather. But yeah, a nice flat paved course is a whole different experience than a dirt hilly course. That's for sure.
Do you, are you sore the next day? Do you feel pretty sore?
Sometimes, some races
Yeah.
definitely, other races. The thing is, you and I have talked about this, and you talk about the amount of power and so on. And I think that what there's kind of a disconnect a little bit is that I don't. It's not like my threshold changes, right? I put the same amount of power out. We just go slower.
Right.
So
Right.
so it's kind of like the effect of like doing a longer workout at
Yeah.
threshold versus a shorter workout at threshold, essentially.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I can be sore, and but it's in sort of the usual spots, right? That you would be after a long hard workout.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just it's just an Olympic, instead of taking 2.25 hours, takes 3.75 hours or 4 hours, something like that.
Right. Right.
That's kind of the math on it.
But just, thinking about the torque, right? The torque on the cranks going up a hill that, you're going 3 miles an hour, maybe your cadence is 20 or 30, right? That's a lot of power output, and it's a lot of muscular endurance. It's like saying, go pick up 250 pounds off the ground 80 times in a row, because it's that slow, low power. So that's why I was asking
Yeah.
if you were sore, just because I noticed that, just a ton of torque. It's a
Yeah, a
ton of
little more on the muscular endurance side of things than the aerobic endurance side of things. And
Right, for
the
sure.
bike that I ride now, I've rigged it up with a super compact crank, and so because you really have to sit if you're standing, you really want to be standing for minimal amounts of time, because that trailer starts swaying and it kind of can knock you off your own balance a little bit. So
Right.
I'll try to sit as much as I possibly can.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
just switching gears a little bit.
Sure.
I know you've been coaching CU since 2010. Is that right?
I started with you, and yeah, 2010-11 season. Yeah.
2010. So this is your
Mhm.
14th season.
This is year 14. Yeah.
That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
So what's like one of your favorite memories, or yeah, start with that. What is one of your favorite memories of, 14 years coaching many, many different kids? I mean, hundreds of different kids,
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah. And,
Literally.
the joke that we used to say, Mike, all the time is that, the kids are always 18 to 22, and we get a year older every year. So
Right.
it's harder to chase them down now than it was when we first started doing that together. My favorite memories are always race day.
Yeah.
We won several national championships together.
Hmm.
I continued on with Brad, also a D3 coach, and we won several more.
Yep.
So that 8 year in a row streak, and I've got like these great snapshot memories of when we had the opportunity to watch our kids, break the tape and win
Yeah.
those championships. And some of
Yeah.
those championships I would say were sweeter than others, but
Yeah.
all of them were sweet in their own way. And
Right.
certainly, the athletes who we took from being, good athletes to national champions that we built over the series of years while we were
Right.
there. Those are really sweet. The super talented kids who walked in and basically were destined to be national champions.
Yeah.
They're fun to watch. They're really amazing talents.
Right.
But you get a little more satisfaction from the
Yeah,
ones.
you don't think you're giving as much value as you do to a kid who comes in and maybe they're a 40-minute 10K, but they can't swim, and you teach them to swim and to get in that 25-minute range, and then they can score points for the team, and ultimately that's why you win, right? Because of something like that. Because
Exactly.
that kid that finishes first or second is really not affecting the scoring too much, but those kids at the back end are the ones that really are, determining your where you end up.
Absolutely. That's exactly how it works. And you'll remember, without, we don't want to name names probably, but like we had teams that were, some years you have multiple sort of superstar kind of athletes, and other teams that were more like, I call them the grinder years,
Yeah.
where nobody finishes in the top 10, but everyone finishes in the top 20, and
Right.
that's the kind of thing that will win a championship, even if you don't have
Right.
somebody up a superstar right at the front. So
Yeah.
yeah, those are the kinds of memories that that really stick with me. And it's not only the national championship races;
Right.
it's anytime these kids race and watching them just turn themselves inside out in a way that, like, I've dug deep in races myself, but I've watched our athletes race in a way that I've never had that depth of will to go as hard as they go.
Right. That's a lot of fun. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely.
So, you've been there a while. Do you have anything you could share? I mean, obviously, you've taught a lot of those kids how to swim. You've taught them how to pace the bike. You've taught them how to run well. You've created right workouts and, tapering, all that stuff that a good coach can do. Is there any lessons that they have taught you over the years that you would like to share?
Of course. Well, as you know, we have secret sauce workouts. I can't
Yep.
possibly reveal, exactly what we
Right.
do in that program. Um, but no, that's not true. I mean, it's the same, that every program does, right? It's volume, intensity, quality, and
Yep.
rest, and that's it. The secret sauce on this team is the kids themselves and how they interact with each other and what they're willing to do for each other. I barely even consider that to be coaching in a lot of ways, but
Right. Well, you're providing the place to do it, the platform and all that. And there's a certain level of acceptance of what you're going to accept and what you're not going to accept, right? And they feed off that. And the right kids are going to rise to the top, and the kids that are not going to that don't do well with hard coaching, they don't do well with it. And that's
yeah,
okay.
yeah,
That's okay.
that's true. Yeah. Well, as you know, the triathlon's a club sport at CU, and so we take all comers. And
Yep.
so, we Brad would talk about, we organize the pool from this end is the fast end and this end is the
Yep.
fastest end. There's nobody slow, but we have kids who will join the team who literally do not know how to swim. They can't put their
Right.
face in the water. They can't swim at 25. They can't get across the pool on the
Yep.
first night. And that's the first takeaway. And I think maybe the most important thing is just sort of the spirit for the sport. That it's the spirit of youth. I don't know, but I know that when I was 18 years old, and if I had been in school that had a program like ours with the sort of national championship pedigree and a lot
Mhm.
of elite fast people who've gone on to become professionals and some Olympic hopefuls and so on. I don't. If I didn't know how to swim, I can't even imagine stepping into the room. And I just love that we have young athletes who say like, this is for me, I can't do any of this stuff. I'll figure it out,
Right.
and they always do. And so that spirit is something that you just don't see it outside of college. D3, I think, has created a great family environment and a team environment, but it's not the same. It's not the same as
Right.
collegiate club racing.
Well,
And
there's so much more energy,
ah,
testosterone. I mean,
yeah,
there's
yeah.
a lot of everything, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. And so along those lines, like a sort of a peripheral learning, but I kind of think of it as a second thing, is just to suspend what you think is possible when you set your big
Mhm.
goals, right? And um, I work for Jim Collins professionally during the day. He's got a concept called the BHAG, the Big Hairy Audacious Goal, and it's in order for something to be a BHAG, a big hairy audacious goal, it's got to be something that you're not sure you can actually achieve. It can't be something big, but that you can do.
Right.
And I think that really fits what we see with these collegiate athletes, and honestly, and with the age group athletes I coach through D3 as well, is the idea of setting a BHAG and like showing up at the beginning of that training. Hopefully, you show up on race day knowing you're going to get it done, but showing up at the beginning of a training cycle and saying like, I don't know if I can do an Ironman, or I don't know if I can do, whatever, a 10K swim or whatever
Right.
it is
Or
that
this
your
training
big
block
goal
for,
is.
you know,
Exactly.
yeah.
And then going for it and getting through it, and just the idea of sort of suspending the possible and just going for it with some guidance. That's definitely a huge takeaway. And the last thing I'd say, just for lessons from CU in particular, is just that there's a place for everybody in triathlon. And I get a little taste of this too when I race with Athletes in Tandem, that I go from, not always right at the very front of the race, but toward the front of the race when I'm racing solo, to oftentimes the back of the race.
Yeah.
Like we
Yeah.
might beat 4 people,
Yep.
over the course of the day. And the kinds of people that you meet at both ends, and I assume in the middle, are just everyone's awesome. Their spirit
Yeah.
for the sport. There's thanks for an appreciation for volunteers, and it's very inclusive. It can feel a little daunting maybe with the equipment that some people have and the speed, and obviously there's some monetary considerations to get into the sport, but it doesn't have to be like that. You can race on a borrowed bike, and and you don't necessarily need a wetsuit at every race, and
Right.
pair of running shoes, right? And we can get it done. So it's just a constant reminder that, getting people to their first triathlon, reminds me of how awesome doing my first triathlon was, even though, like I mentioned earlier, it was kind of a disaster. It was still the
Yeah.
start of something really big and important in my life.
That's something I always share with my athletes, especially when they're doing their first Ironman. I'm like, I've done this 10 times. Like, I can't go across that line again for the first time. And, watching them on the tracker or doing it going to a race and seeing them doing it in person, it's just fulfilling, right? You just, this whole thing of, you feel with joy of like, wow, that's really cool. I helped that person do something that maybe they didn't think they could do,
Yeah,
9 months
it's so
ago or a
true.
year ago. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of fun.
And working with age groupers, a lot of times, they're trying something new. They might be really successful in other areas of life,
Right.
or maybe they were great, they're great athletes, but not great triathletes and what have you. And you get to guide them to their first one. And like you said, it's you can't do it again, right? Because you've already
Right.
done it yourself, but you can do it through their eyes, and it's really fun.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I would say that you are the in-house swim expert at D3. So if I have a question, I go to you, or if I need a lesson for somebody, I'll send them to you. In general, we kind of know this, but if you were to look at somebody and they're swimming whatever 215, 100, 230, 100. Typically, when you look at somebody, what are the first three things you look for with their stroke or body position or whatever it is? Like,
Yep.
how do you look at somebody and assess it and say, okay, if we fix this, this will also get fixed at the same time. But man, this guy really has to work on this one thing too. So
Yeah. Well, so at that end of the spectrum, the first thing I look at is just sort of general comfort in the water.
Mhm.
Whether they're fearful. Sometimes you have folks who,
Right.
they swim because they need to swim, but they're generally uncomfortable in the water. And
Right. That's a great
sometimes
point.
that's something that we think about even before we get in the pool, right? When you've got folks who have had maybe some bad experiences in their past,
Yeah.
first swim lessons in a coffee shop as opposed to on the pool deck.
Right.
But even for folks who are swimming and feel like they they don't think they're afraid of it, you can still kind of see cues in their body and in their eyes, when they come up at the wall or what have you, whether they're comfortable or not in the water. So
Yeah.
I try to take get like sort of their water zeitgeist. I don't know what the right word is, but just overall comfort in the water, as it's just a very first assessment. And then really for like a typical age grouper who's just looking to get faster, the three things really are going to be, I look at body position overall. So head position, driving, body position, but overall body
Yeah.
position. I look at the quality of their kick, which I know is not typically considered important for triathletes. Everyone wants to save their legs, but the kick, provides the rhythm of the stroke. It's the cadence of the stroke. And so if that kick is not, it doesn't have to be necessarily strong, but it has to be at least minimally propulsive, right? And it needs to be rhythmic.
Right.
And then the third big thing I'll look at is the quality of their catch, the very front end of their stroke. What happens when their hand hits the water and they transition from recovery to that power phase is what that front end of that stroke looks like. And I think obviously there's a million different nuances that you can work through, but if we look at those three things, that body position, that quality of the kick, and the quality of the catch, I think that it's one of those
Covering 95% of it, right?
Yeah, easily. That's the majority. If we can work on those three things, we're gonna turn a 230 swimmer pretty quickly into a 2-minute swimmer, and then from there you can start making the real gains to start dropping into the 130, 120, and so on.
So my first swim coach in what year was it? 94, 95, something like that. Was an Australian guy. And how he ended up in Rhode Island, I have no idea, but he was there on the pool deck talking in his accent that I had never heard before. Like, I'm from Rhode Island and accents are really bad, but Australian, I mean, it's pretty competitive with the East Coast accent. But he was a believer in a straight arm. So it was a straight arm goes in.
Yep.
A lot of depth, a lot of power. Being at whatever I was, 24, 25 at the time, probably didn't affect me. Doing that now would be a disaster for my shoulders, and I wouldn't be swimming very much, right? So we've gone, now we know that that drag trumps power, right? So we want less drag. And what is your thought? I'm just curious because it always changes. What is your thought on the finish of a stroke? Because you talked about the front end, and that's what I've always taught. But what do you think about the finish of a stroke? Is it 2% of the power, 3%? Does it matter?
So I take maybe what would be an unpopular position on this
It's fine. That's good.
with
Yeah.
swim coaches, but I think as I'm not coaching um
Pool
I'm
swimmers.
not coaching pool swimmers to do a
Yeah.
50 free, right? To where
Right.
so if you're coaching 22-year-olds to swim their fastest 50 free, they can probably get away with a straight arm stroke for a certain amount of time,
Sure. Sure.
Obviously the shape of the stroke has changed many times over the years
Hmm.
since we both started coaching this, but I find the finish for triathletes is to be really not that important. Honestly, like once you get to the back end of that power phase to get that finish in, you're relying on primarily triceps, which is a pretty small muscle to
Right.
ask to do a big job of moving you forward. And so I think about that finish primarily just to set up the recovery and then the front end of that stroke. And
Mhm.
this is, here's a little controversy or whatever. For the most part, I think, distance per stroke as a standalone concept is baloney essentially,
Right.
because it's a combination of your distance per stroke times your stroke rate, right? That
Right.
that determines your speed. And so you get this big focus. We see this all the time with the kids coming into CU, is that they were high school swimmers and their coach just drove into them, super long and
Yeah.
maximize your distance per stroke and minimize your stroke count and so on. And so you get kids who are good swimmers. They might be able to get across a 25-yard pool in 9 strokes, 10 strokes. I mean, that's 9 single arms, not
Right.
cycles.
Right.
But if they do that, they're swimming that 25 in 30 seconds or whatever. Lots of
Right.
gliding. Like it's not a sustainable stroke for speed. And as triathletes, we're typically wearing wetsuits, so you've got a little bit of material around your shoulders, which is of course getting better and better over time. But
Right.
it makes it hard to really to overextend at the front end and to overextend at that back end. And so I most of the time, the advice that I'm giving swimmers is to say, like, you'll be faster if you add a stroke or two per 25. And I mean, you've seen the same faces that I've
Yeah.
seen of like, what? My coach told me I should have a lower stroke count, rather a higher distance per stroke. But the reality is that especially open water, it's not flat surfaces. You've got the wetsuit and so on. Like I'd rather you take a few extra strokes and get more power phase in than more finish really. So
Right.
there's my controversial take on
Oh,
on
that's not that's great. Funny you said that about distance per stroke. When T Ti had first come out, one of the
yeah.
guys we swam in our masters group with had gone for the weekend. One of the very first ones. He came back. This was like 96 or
Okay.
had to be 95 or 96, 94, 95. He came back and he's like, guys, I can get across the pool in 12 strokes and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And he was one of the guys in the back of the lane. So he's looking for an advantage to get to the front of the lane, right? And so the guy who leads the lane very sarcastically said, well, that's great. You can do 12 strokes. But as you said, if it takes you 30 seconds to get there, who cares? Like
Right.
you need
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be able to swim with some speed. Like it
Yep.
doesn't matter.
Yeah,
So
I
I
think there's
totally
some
get that.
helpful sort of concepts and drills within TI, but I don't.
Love them
Maybe you
all.
can
Yeah.
correct me. Like, have we seen any TI Olympians?
No,
I don't
no.
think that's really what it's intended for. So,
Right, right.
yeah, yeah.
Where I was leading you with the finish, and this is just my own belief,
Hmm.
but I think that the shortened finish is actually going to keep you, help you keep that front quadrant swim going. And I feel like I almost, that whole pulling on the rope thing, that's what I think about a lot. And I think about, my hands crossing somewhere around my shoulders and just keeping that power going. It's like, it would be like pedaling 2 strokes and then coasting and then like,
Right.
just keep it going, right? Like that's just it's such an easy concept if you think about it like that.
Yep.
Um,
Exactly right. Yeah.
that whole thing of one arm completely stretched out one direction and the other one with the finish, that those days are over. Like we're onto the new and better science and in concepts and studies and all kinds of things. And people just
Totally
need
agree.
to understand that old school swimming's fine, but if you really want to go fast, I mean, there's better ways to do it on less volume, right?
Yeah, and maybe I'll just share one thing, Mike. Is that you were probably taught the same stroke I was this big outside, inside
Big S
outside S
stroke,
curve.
yeah.
We need to put an S curve in there. And as we move to that, not a straight arm, but a straight pull pattern,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
so good high elbow catch, and then pushing back basically straight toward your hip.
Right.
Um, I gosh, it's probably been 10 or 15, maybe 15 years at this point, but I made the conversion from the way I had been taught and was
Hmm.
fast and won races as a high school and college age kiddo, to this as an adult, this straight arm pull. And it probably took me 3 weeks of really focused swimming just to be able to swim like a regular stroke pattern, not a full catch up. Like I could really only do one arm at a time,
Right.
and then you go through the next little phase of that. And I assume you've probably made the same transition where you kind of lose your old stroke, but you don't have the new stroke yet,
Yeah.
And so, I was being able to go from, hundreds on whatever the 120 or 125 at that point in my life, to like 135 and going backwards, like you
Right.
lose 10, 15 seconds on 100 and you can't get the old stroke back and you don't have the new stroke yet.
Yep.
And I just remember being panicked for
Yeah.
weeks
Yeah.
until finally, like, the time start dropping again, you start getting faster, and then eventually
Right.
you're into the new stroke. So it takes a commitment, and this is something that we see with I'm sure you could tell more stories than I could with athletes all the time, where you say like you need to do X or whatever, and they say, okay, so I tried that for a 25 and it didn't work.
Right.
It's like, well, that's not really what I was talking about.
Right. Well, that's trust the process, right? Like just
Yep.
trust to the workout. And I'll tell you, I've been there where you're at the 135, 140, saying what happened to my 128s and 125s, but
Yep.
making that change, you got to have that long-term thought process and not this instant gratification of I'm going to do this for a week and I'm going to be faster. That doesn't work, right? You got to put the time in. Your body is just trained to do it a certain way, and then you got to untrain it and retrain it. So that's hard.
Exactly. Yeah. The untraining is hard, and it requires kind of a leap of faith, right? That's the benefit of quality coaching. I wouldn't have attempted that if I didn't have a great coach who said to me, listen, this will make you faster. Here's why, and here's how.
Right. Right. So I know you pride yourself on fast transitions. So I really want to know, since we've competed, so many times together, and some of those races may have come down to transitions a few times. What are you thinking when you get out of the water? What are you thinking when you get off the bike? Is there any mantra in your head, or are you just? I know your motto is the fastest. The best thing about transition is not being in there, or something to that effect. But
Yeah.
you might want to say
First law of transitions, don't be in transition, right?
First
And
law of
actually,
transition, right?
I learned that mantra from that or that saying from Ryan Bice, who we coached at CU. He must have picked it up from a coach somewhere, and it's just stuck with me all the time. So
I
yeah,
love it.
transitions, they count, right? And so when you're trying to figure out how to shave a minute off your race, 10 seconds a mile on a 10K is way harder than free speed in transition, right?
Right.
And really, like, transition at its base is you're changing shoes and changing hats, right? It's not complicated at that point. So I don't really use mantras, but I'm kind of a checklist guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I am finishing the swim, before I even get out of the water, I am going through the movie of what my transition is going to look like. So it's, come out of the water, and then what's first, right? Goggles on your head, but don't take the cap off yet. Then unzip the wetsuit and so on.
Right.
So I'm going through those steps, and I visualize that step by step as I'm coming into transition, so that once I get up out of the water, I'm standing up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm mission focused at that point, right? So
Right.
check. Just going through the checklist until
Love
I'm
it.
out of transition and on the bike. Yeah.
I mean, that's the same exact thing I do. I think about, wetsuit off, pull one leg out, step on the other one, I'm out. And then what am I doing? My helmet's on, glasses, and I'm gone, right? That's it. It's that simple.
Right. The mantra is, I get that works for some people. For me, I'm just so focused on the function that I don't need to pump myself up to do it. I just need to know what I'm going to do in order to get it done.
Right. No, that's great. And I know you've done a lot of, some great videos on transition and some good stuff. And I know that you actually even have a transition contest with the kids at CU, right? Like you see if you can beat them, and you owe them ice cream if they beat you or something.
Yeah, we've been doing this for years. We figured out that you and I used to race head to head in the sprint race while they were doing the collegiate Olympic race, and at some point, I don't know if it started back then or right shortly after you moved on, but right around that time, it's been going on for probably 10 years at this point, that basically I'll race the sprint, they race the Olympic, but transitions are exactly the same. And my deal with these kids is that if they can beat me through transition, ties go to me, right?
Yeah.
But if they can beat me in my combined transition times, I'll buy them, froyo from the local froyo shop. And it's like, literally, some of these kids have made me pay. It turns out you can get 30 or 35 ounces into one of those cups or whatever at $1 an ounce or whatever they're charging these days. But so I'm racing 60 kids. There's no reciprocal bet on there. They don't have to buy me anything if I beat them, right? And so I'm just trying to minimize my losses with that. And in a typical year, I'll pay out somewhere between 6 and 10 out of maybe 50
Yeah.
kids who will beat me. At some point, they're younger and faster than I am. I can beat them at the rack, but I can't actually beat them running through transition.
Right.
So,
Right.
but the
Right.
point of it really is to make them think about it, right?
Yeah,
Is to make
for
them
sure.
think about like this is free right here.
Yep.
And as I remind them all the time, like I really should be buying, if there's 50 kids racing, I should be buying 50 froyos because I'm almost a 55-year-old man. I've thrown my back out emptying the dishwasher. This should be easy money for them if they're thinking
Right.
about it.
Right. I
But it
agree.
requires a little work in order to beat Coach Dave.
I
Yeah,
agree. I mean, I have examples of winning my age group and having the second fastest swim, bike, and run, and the guy in front of me had the fastest and everything, but I got him by a few seconds in both transitions, and
absolutely. Yeah,
it
I don't
all
know what
counts, like
people
you
are
said.
doing in transition, but it's costing them places. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So, you've led some of our Zwift workouts with the D3 group, and you
Mhm.
had the Michigan workout that you turned from a track workout into a bike workout, which is a lot of fun. I have that as one of my favorite workouts.
Yeah,
What is your favorite? I know you do a neutral calorie ride on Super Bowl Sunday. You do some
sure.
fun things.
Yeah.
What's your favorite bike workout? Like if it's intense, I mean, bike workout being indoor workout.
Yeah, for indoors, well, I do like that modified Michigan track
Mhm.
workout onto the bike. I think that's pretty fun and
I'm
a
glad it's modified
challenging
because
one.
it's pretty miserable, to be honest.
It's well, it is miserable, but it'll make you strong. That's for sure.
Totally.
So, yeah, the Super Bowl ride, long time tradition with a couple of friends that we now
Mhm.
do on Zwift. We did it even before Zwift was a thing
Yeah.
and on the indoor trainers. Is that we watch the game and ride our bikes on the trainers for the first three quarters, and then basically eat as much as we can during the fourth quarter, and it ends up we try to we call it calorie neutral. Whether it really
Right.
turns out that way, I don't know, but that's been a fun tradition. And I think we're probably just we might be this year might be the 16th year or something that
I was
we'll
going to
do
say
it.
you're like 15, 16, something like
Yeah,
that.
so
Yeah.
we've been doing that for quite a while. So that's definitely fun. And honestly, Zwift, I was a little suspicious of it, I guess, at the beginning. I kind of felt like, okay, well, the serious workouts you do on the CompuTrainer or Perf Pro or something like that. I don't need a video game to
Right.
play, but enough of my athletes were using Zwift that a few years ago I said, all right, I really have to learn this, and I got
Yeah.
just sucked into the just the game side of it and also the training real tool benefit side of it as well. And honestly, some of my favorite workouts are, going for not necessarily the KOMs in the games because I'm not quite that fast, but just trying to set PRs on the Alp
For
or
you.
on
Right.
the big climbs or what have you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I like a little extended suffering time, and the game provides that, and I think it's good training, and it's certainly nice in the on the days where you can't get out and ride. We're blessed with the mountains out here, but you can't
Right.
ride them in October, November, December,
Right.
January. So to be able to go get like a 1 hour climb in where you really feel
Yeah.
like you're doing the work, those are the kinds of workouts I sort of dread and look forward to at the same time.
Right. Awesome. Okay. So just to wrap up, I got a question for you. So, been coaching for a while now. So any advice you'd have for one of your athletes of something not to do, in a race that maybe you've had an experience with that maybe you've done it once or twice, or maybe, just don't do this because I've done it and it will, you know, you'll have a miserable day if you do
I mean, Mike, there are a million things like that. But we've been in this sport. I'm trying to figure out what mistake I haven't made at some time or another, and unfortunately, I've made some of those mistakes more than once. Right, so
Yeah.
even this season, I had a race where I showed up at my bike, from the swim in T1 and realized that my Garmin is in my bag.
At least no
So
one took it, right? That's
well, no, it was probably in the bag in the car, like it wasn't even in transition. I just never put it on. So that kind of stuff is kind of fun and minor. I was sharing with you like an example of the Boulder Peak years ago before I was racing with Athletes in Tandem. There's
Mhm.
a speed limited descent on the back end, and so
Right,
you
right.
wanna have
20, is it
your
25 or so?
I think it's 35, but I think if you
And you
just
can
do
easily go
30, I think
45,
it's
50.
30. Yeah, but I think
Okay.
if you just release the brakes and let it ride, you're going 45
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and I got out on the bike. I did have my computer at that time. I think this was pre Garmin though. and got out on the bike, and it's showing me, no metrics, 0 miles an hour, showing me cadence, but no speed. And I can't figure out what it is. And I look down, I realize in the dark in the morning, I just put the wheel on backwards. So the magnet that you needed was on the wrong side of the bike. So I had to kind of make sure that I didn't pass anyone during that speed zone. I got passed by people. I'm sure I gave up a few miles an hour on that. So, so that's a good one. Along the technology, same thing. This is maybe there's a good, those are sort of whatever, these things happen and you kind of get through the race. But one that I think has a good lesson is basically is calibrating yourself to multiple inputs so that you kind of know how to pace out your day. And especially at the longer races, this is more important. So, it's not just knowing power or heart rate or a combination of power and heart rate or what have you, but that RPE, which we kind of, it gets second billing, I think, when, people get deep into the sport because they really want to know what their watts per kilogram are. And, can I hit 1,000 watts and whatever, but being calibrated with your RPE is important. And I play a game where I'll be riding along even still, and I'll say, this feels like 215 watts or whatever. And I'll look down and see if I'm within a few watts of that, and you want to get close to that because the story that I'll tell is that this is now 15 plus years ago, but at an Ironman in Canada, was a mass start back in those days. You got, 2,000 or 2,500 people in a bay, and they just shoot up a cannon, right? And so they count you down, 5, 4, 3. So when I got to 3, I hit my polar watch to start it, and the screen went blank, and that was it for the day. And my whole plan was based on heart rate and power. And I had none of it for the day. So, yeah, being able to have a plan B. So some of these stupid mistakes, they can really hurt you, right? You show up to a race without your helmet. Maybe you can borrow a helmet or whatever. There are some things that could keep you from racing, right? You show up on your bike and you forgot to put the wheels on, the front wheels sitting on the driveway. That's the kind of thing that can actually keep you from racing. But most of the mistakes that we make, you can race, but you just need to figure out like, what's the alternative way to get through this. Right. And so, last year, this weekend last year, I ran the New York City Marathon, and the night before the race at like 9:00, as I'm going to bed the night before, we got to be at the bus at 3:30 in the morning. I happened to notice in the athlete guide that you can't wear a backpack or a hydration vest or whatever. Well, that was my entire fueling plan was my race vest, and so I showed up in the morning and had to go with whatever was available on course, and I got a finish, but it wasn't good. It wasn't good. So, making sure that you're working on the, plan A, plan B, plan C. It's the checklist I was talking about earlier, check, and have ways to get through, even if things don't go exactly as planned, whether it's because of something you control or something you don't. That's, you race long enough and just about everything's going to befall you at some point. So, having a backup is a good way to go.
I agree. Well, thanks so much for coming on. We really enjoyed talking with you, and I'm sure we'll have you on again. Good luck at Indian Wells. Let's hope you kick some butt down there. And,
thanks. Yeah. I'll try to make the best of the luck I get. I kind of feel like, good luck is for the unprepared. I'll be prepared, but I'll take the luck that I get and turn it into whatever I can for speed.
I love it. Well, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. Really fun.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Trust the Process. If you have a question on anything related to triathlon, please send me an email at mike@d3multisport.com. We'd love to hear from you. Make it a great day.